My own son slammed a crumpled receipt onto my granite kitchen counter, his face red with rage as he screamed, "Stop wasting my money! You are burning through our future!" He was completely furious that I had bought a vintage watch at a charity auction using my own personal bank account. His wife stood behind him, sipping her coffee with a smug, arrogant little smile. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just picked up my watch, nodded quietly, and walked away. My son thought he had finally put a frail, senile old man in his place. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent my entire career tracking down hidden offshore assets for the Internal Revenue Service, and that his little outburst had just triggered an audit that would leave him homeless and bankrupt by the end of the week. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always catches up with those who take family for granted. I live in a sprawling 4-bedroom home in a quiet, affluent Seattle suburb. I paid off the mortgage 20 years ago. The cedar wrap-around porch and the large bay windows overlooking the pine trees were my late wife Barbara's pride and joy. When Barbara passed away 3 years ago, the house suddenly felt entirely too large and too quiet. But it was mine. It was our shared history built on decades of honest labor. A year ago, I underwent a minor knee replacement surgery. My son Blake, who is 34 years old, insisted that he and his 32-year-old wife, Vanessa, move in to keep an eye on me during my recovery. It sounded like the responsible, loving thing for an only son to do. I was grateful for the company and agreed without hesitation. That was my first and greatest mistake. Within a single month, my physical recovery was completely forgotten. Blake and Vanessa did not move in to help me. They moved in to occupy the territory. Under the false guise of preventing me from climbing the main staircase with my healing knee, they aggressively relocated all of my personal belongings into the small, dimly lit downstairs guest room. They took over the master suite. Soon after, Vanessa began boxing up Barbara's antique vases and our framed family photographs, replacing them with cold, minimalist modern art that looked like it belonged in a corporate lobby. I watched my home slowly being erased, but I kept the peace. I wanted my family close. I swallowed my pride, believing that this was just a temporary transition phase. But predators do not respect patience. They only see it as an invitation to take more. The true toxic nature of their occupation revealed itself yesterday afternoon. I had recently participated in an online charity auction raising funds for a cancer research foundation that Barbara had passionately supported during her life. I won the bid on a beautifully restored 1968 vintage watch. The price was $3,000. It was a very modest sum to me, a quiet tribute to my wife's memory, and a small reward for a lifetime of hard work. I was in the backyard pulling weeds when the delivery truck arrived. By the time I walked through the sliding glass doors and stepped into the kitchen, Blake was already tearing open the sealed package addressed to me. He stood in the center of the kitchen, right under the bright, recessed lighting. The cardboard box was ripped open, and the velvet watch case sat exposed on the granite island. He held the printed invoice in his trembling hand. His face was flushed, contorted into a mask of pure indignation and unchecked entitlement. Vanessa leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator. She was wrapped in an expensive silk robe she had bought last week, holding a steaming mug of artisanal coffee. She did not look like a guest in my home. She looked like a wealthy landlord observing a troublesome, unwanted tenant. "What is this?" Blake demanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He stepped toward me and slammed the receipt down onto the granite counter. The sharp smack of paper against stone made me stop in my tracks. "It is a vintage watch," I replied evenly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "I bought it at a charity auction honoring your mother's favorite foundation." Blake scoffed, letting out a harsh, ugly sound of disbelief. $3,000. Are you completely out of your mind? I looked at him, genuinely puzzled by his intense outrage over my personal finances. "It is my money, Blake. I wanted the watch." He slammed his hand on the counter again, hitting the stone so hard that it made Vanessa's coffee mug rattle. "It is not just your money anymore. You are living under our care. You are burning through our future. Stop wasting my money." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Our future. My money. I stared at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in the driveway outside. The boy whose expensive college tuition I had paid in full without asking for a single dime in return. He was 34 years old, living rent-free in my house, sleeping in my bed upstairs, and he was currently shouting at me for spending $3,000 of my own hard-earned savings. I glanced over at Vanessa. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. The corners of her mouth twitched upward into a faint, arrogant smirk. She was thoroughly enjoying this. She loved watching her husband aggressively discipline his elderly father. They truly believed I was just a frail, retired widower, living on a fixed income, slowly losing my grip on reality. They believed they had already inherited my life. They were just impatiently waiting for me to quietly die in the downstairs guest room, so they could officially claim the deed to the property and liquidate everything I owned. In the face of such blatant, crushing disrespect, most fathers would yell. Most men would demand respect loudly, remind their son who owned the house, or break down in tears of betrayal. I did none of those things. Yelling is a sign of lost control. Emotional outbursts are for people who do not have a strategy. I looked down at the velvet box on the island. I reached out, picked up my watch, and slowly slipped the receipt into my shirt pocket. "I understand, Blake," I said quietly. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger, sorrow, or fear. Blake crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself out with the false authority of a tyrant who firmly believes he has won the war. "Good," he muttered. "Just remember that we have major expenses to worry about. We cannot afford these kinds of irresponsible financial surprises." I nodded slowly, looking directly into his eyes. "You are absolutely right. I will not make another irresponsible financial decision." I turned my back on them and walked slowly down the hallway toward the guest room. I could hear Vanessa whispering something to Blake, followed by a soft, mocking laugh. They honestly thought they had successfully cowed an old man. They thought they had established absolute dominance over my finances and my home. What my arrogant son and his smug wife did not know was that my entire career was built on dismantling arrogant thieves. For 30 years, I worked as a senior forensic auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. I spent decades tracking hidden offshore accounts, dismantling complex corporate fraud rings, and freezing the assets of extremely dangerous people. I sold my private consulting firm 10 years ago for an 8-figure sum money that is heavily secured in blind trusts that Blake had absolutely no idea existed. To him, I was just a boring retired man who used to look at spreadsheets. He had no concept of the digital and legal warfare I was capable of unleashing with a single phone call. I closed the guest room door behind me and locked it. The deep, heavy sadness of losing my son evaporated in an instant, replaced entirely by the cold, calculating clarity I used to feel right before raiding a corrupt corporation. Blake had just told me to stop wasting his money. He had just claimed ownership over my life's work. The grieving father in me died in that kitchen. The forensic auditor woke up. I sat down at my small wooden desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I do not argue with parasites. I simply audit them. And as the screen illuminated my face in the dark room, I prepared to initiate a financial audit that would completely vaporize their entire existence by sunrise. The house is completely quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes 2 in the morning. I am sitting at the small desk in the downstairs guest room. The only illumination in the dark space comes from the glowing screen of my heavily encrypted laptop. Upstairs, I can hear the faint, muffled sound of Blake and Vanessa's television. They are comfortably asleep in the master bedroom, entirely oblivious to the digital storm I am currently preparing. I pour myself a glass of black coffee from the small thermos I brought with me. My hands are not shaking. My pulse is steady and calm. The profound sadness of losing my son has completely evaporated. It has been replaced by a familiar icy focus that I have not felt since my days working for the government. This is my domain now. I log into my primary banking portal using a secure, untraceable connection. 3 months ago, when the knee surgery left me temporarily bedridden and groggy from the prescription pain medication, I made the incredibly foolish mistake of trusting my only child. I signed a limited power of attorney. It was a standard legal document drafted by my lawyer Wallace, meant strictly to allow Blake to pay the monthly utility bills, cover the property taxes, and purchase routine groceries. It was a highly restricted authorization specifically designed to protect my assets while allowing my son to assist his recovering father. But Blake did not see that document as a temporary family responsibility. He saw it as a skeleton key to a vault he believed he deserved to raid. I navigate to the transaction history of my checking and short-term liquid savings accounts. The numbers load on the screen, and the sheer audacity of his theft is instantly laid bare. He did not just skim a few $100s here and there for extra spending money. He executed a systematic, highly aggressive financial drain. I begin to trace the architecture of his embezzlement. Over the past 90 days, Blake has wired exactly $140,000 out of my liquid accounts. He moved the money in staggered increments of $7,000 or $8,000 at a time to avoid triggering the automatic bank fraud alerts. It is a pathetic amateur tactic he likely read about on some internet forum. He funneled the stolen capital into a tangled web of dummy accounts, but he left his digital fingerprints everywhere. I follow the money trail effortlessly. I am not an amateur. I am not a confused elderly man who does not understand technology. 10 years ago, I sold my boutique forensic accounting firm for an 8-figure sum. I spent my entire professional life hunting down professional money launderers, exposing corrupt corporate accountants, and freezing the assets of extremely dangerous tax evaders. My real wealth, the massive fortune I acquired from selling my firm, is locked away in impenetrable blind trusts that Blake has absolutely no idea exist. He honestly thought he was draining my entire life savings tonight. He did not realize he was merely scraping the surface of a minor overflow account I used for everyday expenses. I pull up the destination routing numbers to see exactly where the stolen $140,000 went. The money was split right down the middle. Half of it was blindly dumped into a completely doomed cryptocurrency startup. It is a pathetic, unregulated digital coin venture, practically guaranteed to collapse by the end of the fiscal quarter. Blake actually thought he was an investment genius. He risked my hard-earned money on a digital scam to get rich quick, desperate, to prove he was a successful entrepreneur without actually doing any of the hard work. I look at the transaction logs for his fake digital currency, watching the value plummet in real time on the global exchange. He bought into a pyramid scheme at the absolute peak, pouring my legitimate cash into a digital void. It is the ultimate insult. I spent my life meticulously balancing ledgers, ensuring every cent was accounted for and legally protected, and my son threw it away on an internet gamble. The other half of the money went directly to his wife. I uncover months of staggering credit card statements paid off using my savings. Vanessa spent tens of thousands of dollars on designer handbags, high-end luxury spa retreats, and imported clothing. The very silk robe she wore while watching her husband scream at me in the kitchen was paid for with the money I earned. She was parading around my house mocking my frugality while wearing the spoils of their grand theft. But the financial bleeding does not stop there. The greed of a parasite is never satisfied. I dig deeper into my municipal property records and discover a pending application for a massive home equity line of credit. Blake actually tried to leverage the house I built with my late wife. He applied to borrow $250,000 against the deed of my home to cover the inevitable losses of his failed crypto investments. He forged my digital signature on the preliminary application just 3 days ago. Discovering the home equity loan application hurts worse than the stolen cash. This house is the physical manifestation of my life with Barbara. We picked out the cedar wrap around porch together. We planted the pine trees in the backyard when they were just saplings. This home is a sanctuary built on 40 years of honest labor and shared love. Blake looked at these walls and saw nothing but a piggy bank to be smashed open. Forging my digital signature to borrow $250,000 against my home is not just fraud. It is a desecration of his mother's memory. He was willing to risk the roof over my head so he could cover his own disastrous financial mistakes. My investigation is no longer just about the money. I need to know their endgame. I run a background diagnostic on the home network router, capturing the unencrypted traffic from Blake's personal laptop upstairs. I intercept his outgoing email outbox. What I find makes the blood in my veins freeze completely. It is a draft addressed to a shady, unlicensed medical practitioner operating out of a strip mall 2 towns over. The subject line reads, "Urgent medical consultation regarding elderly father." I read the body of the email. Blake explicitly details a plan to pay this corrupt doctor a massive cash bribe to sign a fraudulent medical affidavit. The affidavit would legally declare me mentally unfit, claiming I am suffering from advanced, aggressive dementia. Blake wrote that my recent purchase of the antique charity watch was evidence of my declining cognitive state and my inability to manage my own finances. The email draft to the corrupt doctor reveals the true depths of their depravity. They meticulously listed false symptoms to build their case. They wrote that I wander the house at night confused. They lied and said I leave the stove burners on. They fabricated a narrative of a fragile, broken old man who poses a danger to himself. The cruelty is staggering. They planned to have strangers arrive at my door, pack my things, and drag me away to a facility where I would be stripped of my autonomy. They wanted me heavily medicated, staring at a blank wall, waiting to die while they hosted dinner parties in my dining room. Their deadline for this medical coup is the end of the current month. They are actively orchestrating illegal kidnapping. They want to strip me of my human rights, force me into a locked state-run medical facility, and assume total legal control over my remaining estate. They want to erase me from society so they can live a luxurious life in the home I paid for. I lean back in my chair and stare at the glowing screen. The harsh light illuminates the cold reality of my situation. I am not dealing with a misguided son who made a poor financial choice out of desperation. I am dealing with a dangerous predator and his equally ruthless accomplice. They intend to lock me away in a medical prison to fund their delusions of grandeur. They plan to take everything I own and leave me to rot in a sterile room heavily medicated and completely silenced. They have made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was weak prey. They assumed my quiet demeanor was a sign of intellectual decline. They confused my patience with senility. As I export all the fraudulent bank statements, the forged loan application, and the sinister email draft to an encrypted external hard drive, my plan becomes crystal clear. I will not argue with them. I will not confront them in the morning. I am going to execute a financial strike so devastating they will not even see it coming. I am going to let them wake up in a reality where every single safety net has been completely eradicated. I close my laptop, the screen going dark. The audit is complete. The retaliation begins at sunrise. The sun rose over the Seattle suburbs, casting a cold, pale light through the bay windows of the house I built. I sat at the small kitchen table sipping plain black coffee, watching my son and his wife prepare for their day. Blake adjusted the collar of his tailored suit, a suit paid for by my savings, while Vanessa slipped on a pair of designer sunglasses. They moved with the brisk, arrogant energy of people who believed they owned the world. They loudly announced they were heading off to their respective jobs. I knew the truth now. Blake was heading to a coffee shop to hopelessly monitor his collapsing cryptocurrency scam, and Vanessa was driving to an upscale boutique district to spend money that did not belong to her. "Have a good day, Dad," Blake said, his voice dripping with that familiar patronizing tone. "Try not to buy any more useless junk while we are out. We need to stick to the budget." I did not react to the insult. I simply offered a mild, compliant nod. "Have a productive day, son," I replied. Vanessa did not even look at me. She just grabbed her keys and walked out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, the deadbolt engaging with a solid thud. The house fell completely silent. They were gone. The performance was over. I stood up from the table, carried my coffee mug to the sink, and washed it methodically. I had given them every opportunity to be a real family. Now they were merely subjects of a financial liquidation. I walked directly to the guest room and opened my encrypted laptop. I had exactly 6 hours before they typically returned for the evening. 6 hours to systematically dismantle every safety net they had ever known. I initiated the burn sequence. My first target was the limited power of attorney. This was the legal document that gave Blake the authority to access my checking accounts and manage my basic affairs. I logged into the state legal portal and electronically filed the revocation paperwork. With a few precise keystrokes, the document was permanently nullified. Blake was instantly stripped of his legal right to act on my behalf. If he tried to walk into a bank branch and demand access to my funds, he would be treated as a trespassing stranger. The legal guillotine had fallen. Next, I turned my attention to the compromised joint banking accounts. I stared at the screen, observing the remaining balance that Blake had not yet managed to siphon into his digital pyramid schemes. There was over $60,000 sitting in the primary checking account, waiting to be stolen. I opened the secure portal to my offshore blind. Trusts, the massive financial fortresses I had built after selling my forensic accounting firm 10 years ago. I initiated a total sweep. I did not leave a single penny behind for maintenance fees. I transferred the entire legitimate balance out of the compromised accounts and securely routed it directly into the untouchable trust. I refreshed the banking page. The screen blinked, reloaded, and displayed the new available balance: $0.00. I stared at those digits for a long time. That zero represented the exact amount of financial support Blake and Vanessa would receive from me for the rest of their natural lives. The bank accounts were empty, frozen, and completely useless. Their personal piggy bank had been officially vaporized. With the liquid assets secured, I needed to protect the physical fortress. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct unlisted number of my longtime estate attorney, Wallace. Wallace and I had known each other for 30 years. He was a brilliant, ruthless lawyer who handled my firm's corporate acquisitions before I retired. Calvin Wallace answered, his voice sharp and professional. "What is the emergency?" "Wallace, I need you to execute an immediate hyper-restrictive lock on the deed to my Seattle home," I instructed calmly. "I need it filed with the county clerk before noon today." Wallace did not waste time asking unnecessary questions. He could hear the absolute gravity in my tone. "Consider it done, Calvin. What are the specific parameters of the lock?" "I want the property completely frozen," I told him. "No secondary loans, no liens, no transfer of ownership, and absolutely no sale of the estate can be authorized without my physical in-person notarized presence. I want the county registry to flag any attempt to leverage the house as immediate actionable fraud." Wallace typed rapidly on his keyboard in the background. "It is done, Calvin. The house is an impenetrable vault. If anyone tries to borrow a dime against this property, alarms will ring at the county level." "Thank you, Wallace. I will be going off the grid for a while. I will contact you from a secure line when the dust settles." I ended the call. Blake's fraudulent home equity loan was now completely dead in the water. When his desperate crypto investors came knocking for their $200,000, Blake would confidently try to hand them a loan against my house. Instead, he would find himself holding a worthless piece of paper. He had no cash, no credit, and now no collateral. The walls were rapidly closing in on him. The financial and legal severances were complete. It was time for the physical escape. I pulled a single dark canvas duffel bag from the closet. I did not pack any sentimental items. I did not take photo albums or souvenirs. Those things belonged to a past life that had been tainted by greed. I packed only the absolute essentials. 7 days of clothing, my daily medications, basic toiletries, and the encrypted external hard drive containing the massive dossier of evidence against them. I zipped the bag shut. It weighed barely 15 pounds. It was incredibly liberating to reduce my entire physical existence to a single portable bag. I walked out of the guest room and made my way to the kitchen island. I needed to leave a message. I did not want to write a long emotional letter. Explanations are for people who seek reconciliation. I sought only absolute consequences. I wanted them to understand their ruin the moment they walked through the door. I reached into my pocket and took out the vintage charity watch, the exact item that had triggered Blake's arrogant outburst the day before. I placed the velvet box gently on the cold granite counter. Next to the watch, I placed my smartphone. I performed a hard factory reset, wiping all contacts, messages, and location tracking data. It was just a useless piece of glass and metal now. I left it sitting perfectly parallel to the watch. Finally, I went to my wireless printer and retrieved a single sheet of paper. It was the final bank statement from the primary checking account. I laid the paper down next to the phone. The numbers were printed in bold black ink. Available balance $0.00. The tableau was perfect. The watch represented the trigger. The phone represented their inability to reach me. The zero balance represented their new reality. It was a silent, devastating narrative left on the kitchen island. They would return to a quiet house, look at the counter, and experience the most profound, suffocating panic of their entire lives. I looked around the house one last time. I looked at the hardwood floors, the high ceilings, the empty spaces where my wife's antiques used to sit before Vanessa sold them. I felt no sorrow. I felt no hesitation. The house was just a building now, a temporary trap meant to contain two desperate parasites. I hoisted the duffel bag over my shoulder and walked out the front door. I pulled it shut behind me, hearing the familiar click of the heavy lock engaging. The crisp, cool Seattle air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and approaching rain. A sleek black town car was already waiting at the end of the driveway. I had pre-arranged the transport using an untraceable prepaid card. The driver, a quiet professional in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door for me. He did not ask any questions. He simply nodded respectfully. I climbed into the back seat and settled into the leather upholstery. The driver closed the door, shutting out the sounds of the suburban neighborhood. I did not look back at the house as the car pulled away from the curb. I watched the manicured lawns and familiar streets roll past the tinted windows. I was severing my ties to this city, to this neighborhood, and to the people who had tried to bury me alive. I was no longer a victim. I was a ghost. And my disappearance was the final lethal move that would initiate their absolute destruction. I am sitting in a leather chair inside a high-rise apartment in downtown Denver. The Rocky Mountains loom outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but my eyes are locked entirely on the glowing monitor on my desk. Before I left Seattle, I installed microscopic wireless cameras in the kitchen, the living room, and the main hallways of my house. I did not install them to spy on my family out of paranoia. I installed them to audit a crime scene in real time. I pour myself a glass of sparkling water. The live high-definition feed is crystal clear. The trap is perfectly set on the granite island. At exactly 6 in the evening, the front door opens. Blake and Vanessa walk into the kitchen. They look exhausted, but arrogant. Vanessa tosses her designer handbag onto the sofa. Blake loosens his tie, complaining loudly about the highway traffic. They do not yet realize the atmosphere of the house has completely changed. The silence is no longer the quiet of a resting old man. It is the absolute void of a vacated target. Blake walks toward the kitchen island to pour a drink. He stops abruptly. He sees the vintage watch sitting in its velvet box. He sees my phone resting perfectly parallel to it. He sees the printed piece of paper. He picks up the bank statement. I watch his face through the camera lens. I watch the exact second his reality shatters. The blood completely drains from his cheeks. His jaw goes slack. Vanessa notices his paralysis. She walks over, asking him what is wrong. Blake cannot speak. He simply hands her the piece of paper. Vanessa looks at the bold black ink. $0.00. She drops the paper onto the counter as if it burned her fingers. She grabs my phone and taps the screen. It is wiped clean. A factory reset brick. They look down the hallway toward the guest room. Blake runs. I switch the camera feed to the hallway. He kicks the guest room door open. The room is immaculate and completely empty. My duffel bag is gone. Panic is a highly predictable human response. A forensic auditor knows that when thieves lose access to capital, they always try the digital back doors first. Blake sprints upstairs to the master bedroom and grabs his laptop. He rushes back to the kitchen, slamming the computer onto the island. His fingers tremble as he types frantically. He is trying to access the banking portals using the limited power of attorney he believes he still holds. I watch the screen reflection in the window behind him. Access denied. He types the password again. Account locked. He tries to access the secondary savings portal. Authorization revoked. He slams his fists onto the keyboard. He screams that the banking system is broken. Vanessa paces back and forth, pulling at her hair. She tells him to call the bank manager. Blake dials the number on his own phone. He puts it on speaker. A polite customer service representative informs Blake that his power of attorney was legally nullified that morning. The representative states that the account holder removed all funds and closed the joint access portals. Blake demands to know where the money went. The representative politely informs him that he is no longer an authorized party and terminates the call. The silence in the kitchen is absolute. Blake stares at the phone. The $140,000 he stole is gone. The access to future funds is completely obliterated. Denial is the second phase of a financial collapse. Vanessa refuses to accept the severity of the situation. She insists this is just a misunderstanding, a temporary glitch. She declares she is starving and orders Blake to calm down. She picks up her phone to order dinner from an expensive sushi restaurant downtown. She smugly reads out a massive order of imported sashimi and premium rolls. She pulls out her heavy platinum credit card, the card I paid off every single month. She reads the numbers to the restaurant host on speakerphone. She waits with a tight, impatient smile. The host returns to the line. He apologizes and states the card has been declined. Vanessa scoffs. She tells him to run it again, complaining about their incompetent payment system. The host runs it again. It is brutally declined. He asks for another form of payment. Vanessa pulls out her gold backup card. Declined. She tries a third card. Declined. The restaurant host hangs up. Vanessa stares at her wallet in absolute shock. I canceled all the secondary cards attached to my primary accounts hours ago. She has no credit. She has no cash. The designer clothes in her closet and the luxury handbag on the sofa are completely useless. They cannot even buy a plate of raw fish. The reality of their situation finally crushes their denial. Blake begins to hyperventilate. He paces the kitchen like a trapped animal. He grabs his phone and tells Vanessa they need to call the police. He says they must report me missing. He claims I must be having a severe medical episode, wandering the streets in a state of dangerous confusion. He types 911 into his keypad. Vanessa lunges across the island and rips the phone out of his hands. She looks at him with wide, terrified eyes. She asks him what he thinks the police will do when they investigate. She reminds him that filing a missing persons report will trigger a deep dive into my recent financial history. The authorities will look at the bank statements. They will see the $140,000 Blake transferred into his failed cryptocurrency accounts. They will see the tens of thousands of dollars Vanessa spent on luxury vacations and designer goods. Vanessa spells it out for him with brutal clarity. If the police look at those accounts, they will not see a confused old man. They will see massive elder financial exploitation. They will see grand larceny. They will see wire fraud. Calling the police is equivalent to calling their own parole officers. Blake stares at her. He slowly lowers his hands. The realization hits him like a physical blow. They cannot ask for help. Asking for help means exposing their own massive theft. They are completely paralyzed. I watch them stand in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by expensive appliances they do not own inside a house they tried to steal. They are effectively trapped in a beautiful wooden cage. Blake sinks onto a bar stool, burying his face in his hands. He mutters about his cryptocurrency investors. He whispers that he owes very aggressive people $200,000 by the end of the week. He reminds Vanessa that they have absolutely zero liquid cash to satisfy that debt. Vanessa backs away from him. The facade of their perfect wealthy marriage fractures instantly. She crosses her arms, glaring at him with pure venom. She asks him how he could be so stupid to lose control of the situation. She blames his sloppy transfers. He blames her reckless spending. The solidarity of thieves only lasts as long as the money flows. The moment the capital dries up, they turn on each other with vicious precision. I sit back in my chair in Denver and take a sip of sparkling water. The camera feed is flawless. I do not feel any sympathy for the two people tearing each other apart on my screen. They wanted to lock me in a medical prison to fund their delusions. They dug a massive financial grave, and I simply handed them the shovels. The void they created has officially awakened, and it is going to swallow them whole. The morning sun creeps through the blinds of my Denver apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. My second cup of black coffee sits warm on the desk next to my glowing monitor. The live feed from the security cameras hidden in my Seattle home displays the aftermath of a completely sleepless night. Blake is pacing the length of the kitchen floor like a condemned man waiting for the trapdoor to open. His arrogant posture from yesterday has been entirely replaced by a suffocating, visceral terror. I watch him run his hands through his uncombed hair, muttering frantically to himself. He is desperately calculating his survival. He believes he still has one final escape route available to him. He does not know I have already sealed it completely shut. Let me explain the exact nature of the financial grave my son dug for himself. During my midnight audit, I uncovered the highly specific details of his cryptocurrency disaster. Blake did not just lose my stolen money on a bad digital market gamble. He engaged in massive, highly leveraged margin trading. When traditional banking institutions rightfully rejected his absurd business proposals, he sought capital elsewhere. He borrowed heavy funds from a group of aggressive private investors who operate strictly outside the bounds of traditional banking regulations. These are not corporate lenders who send polite reminder letters printed on heavy cardstock. They are ruthless operators who demand exorbitant daily returns and enforce their collections with severe physical intimidation. Blake owes them exactly $200,000. The hard deadline for that margin call is this coming Friday. If he does not produce the liquid cash by the end of the business week, his problems will escalate rapidly, from financial ruin to direct physical danger. I watch him on the screen as he stares blankly at the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. It is Wednesday morning. He has exactly 48 hours to produce $250,000 out of thin air. I watch him walk heavily into the master bathroom and splash cold water on his pale face. He begins to dress in his most expensive tailored suit. He ties a silk tie with trembling fingers, trying to project an image of wealth and stability. He is putting on his armor. He truly believes he can fake his way out of this catastrophic crisis. He thinks the home equity line of credit he applied for last week is his ultimate salvation. He forged my digital signature on the preliminary application to borrow $250,000 against the deed of the house I built. He assumes the paperwork is simply moving through the normal, slow, bureaucratic channels of the banking system. He plans to walk into the loan office today, flash his charming smile, and push the final approval through the system. He assumes the loan officer will simply hand him a cashier's check, and he can pay off his dangerous investors before they ever come looking for him in person. He looks in the bathroom mirror and practices his confident smile. He still genuinely thinks he is the smartest man in the room. He grabs his leather briefcase and rushes out the front door, leaving Vanessa crying silently on the sofa. He climbs into his leased luxury sports car and speeds out of the driveway. I switch my surveillance from the home cameras to the digital tracking software I secretly planted on his devices. I follow his location marker as he drives aggressively toward the downtown financial district. I know exactly where he is going. He is heading to the premier wealth management branch in the city center. This is a pristine, secure environment where successful people go to handle large sums of money. Blake parks his car and walks confidently through the revolving glass doors. He is completely unaware that he is walking directly into a concrete wall. I open the banking network logs on my secure monitor in Denver. I cannot see the physical interior of the bank, but I can track the exact digital footprint of his transaction. I can picture him sitting in a plush leather chair across from a senior loan specialist. I imagine him speaking with that smooth, condescending tone he always uses when he believes he is in control. He probably tells the officer that his elderly father is resting comfortably at home and that he is just finalizing the necessary paperwork to help manage the family estate. He slides the forged application documents across the polished mahogany desk. He expects the officer to type a few keystrokes, stamp an approval code, and transfer the massive funds into his personal account. On my computer screen, a bright red notification suddenly flashes across the secure network portal. The loan officer has entered my name and social security number into the central banking database to finalize the equity loan. The system instantly collides with the hyper-restrictive deed lock that my attorney Wallace and I placed on the property yesterday morning. The lock does not just simply deny the loan application. It triggers an immediate high-level automated fraud alert across the entire banking network. The system perfectly recognizes that an unauthorized individual is attempting to leverage a frozen asset using forged credentials. At the bank, the loan officer's screen goes completely blank, except for a flashing security warning, demanding that they secretly alert branch security and the internal fraud department. I can picture the exact sequence of events unfolding in that pristine office. The loan officer stops typing. The polite customer service smile completely fades from their face. They smoothly excuse themselves from the desk, telling Blake they just need to run a quick verification protocol with their branch manager. Blake probably leans back in his expensive leather chair feeling triumphant, thinking the money is only seconds away. He checks his luxury watch. He thinks about how he will call his aggressive investors and boast that their money is fully secured. He thinks he has completely outsmarted everyone. He sits there in his tailored suit, completely blind to the reality that his entire life has just been legally and financially dismantled. 10 agonizing minutes pass. The door to the office opens. It is not the loan officer returning with a signed check. It is the senior branch manager accompanied by 2 armed private security guards. The manager sternly informs Blake that there is a severe and critical irregularity with the property deed. The manager states that the loan application has been officially flagged for felony forgery and attempted real estate fraud. Blake's confident smile shatters instantly. He stands up, his voice rising in high-pitched panic. He tries to argue with the manager. He tries to use his remaining charm. He claims it is a simple misunderstanding, a ridiculous banking glitch that can be easily resolved. But the bank employees are completely unresponsive to his desperate lies. The digital evidence in their system is absolute and undeniable. The security guards step forward and firmly instruct him to gather his belongings immediately. They do not let him leave quietly. Because the fraud alert is so severe, they are required to escort him out of the building to ensure he does not access any other sensitive areas or harass the staff. Blake is marched out of the glass office and guided across the expansive marble floor of the main banking lobby. Dozens of tellers, wealthy corporate clients, and local business owners stop what they are doing and stare. The successful young entrepreneur is being publicly removed like a common dangerous criminal. His face burns with a humiliating crimson flush. He keeps his head down, staring intensely at the marble floor as the heavy glass doors are held open for him by the guards. The manager instructs him that he is permanently banned from the premises and that the local authorities will be receiving a full detailed report of his fraudulent application before the end of the day. He stumbles out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The crisp morning air offers him absolutely no relief. His breathing is shallow and rapid as panic completely overtakes his nervous system. He leans heavily against a brick wall, clutching his leather briefcase, as if it could somehow protect him from the collapsing world. His grand escape plan has been totally vaporized. There is no home equity loan. There is no $250,000 waiting for him. He is locked out of the banking system permanently. His final financial safety net has been burned to ashes. Then his phone begins to ring. The sharp sound cuts through the heavy noise of the city traffic. He pulls the device from his pocket with shaking hands. The screen displays an unsaved local number. He lets it ring. It stops. 2 seconds later, a different unsaved number calls. He ignores it again. Then a text message appears on his glowing screen. It is from the private investors. The message is short and brutally clear. They want their $200,000 and they expect to see it today. They know he is dodging their calls. The margin call has officially arrived. Blake stands completely frozen on the pavement. He has no money. He has no credit. He cannot leverage the house. He cannot call the police for protection without confessing to grand larceny and elder exploitation. He is entirely alone, completely exposed to the violent elements of his own devastating greed. The trap has closed perfectly, and the predators he borrowed from are now actively hunting him in the streets. I sit in the quiet stillness of my Denver apartment. My eyes are fixed on the large digital monitor displaying a live security feed from a quiet suburban street in Seattle. The perspective is different this time. I am not looking through the cameras hidden inside my home. I am looking through a high-definition lens mounted on the dashboard of an unremarkable gray sedan parked directly across the street from my driveway. The sedan belongs to Gideon. Gideon is a private investigator with a background in corporate espionage. I retained his services early yesterday morning. He is a ghost in the neighborhood, sitting silently behind tinted windows. He has a highly sensitive parabolic microphone aimed straight at my front porch. Through my encrypted earpiece, I can hear the gentle rustle of the wind blowing through the tall pine trees. I can also hear the harsh, frantic scraping of heavy wooden furniture being dragged relentlessly across my hardwood floors. Vanessa is inside the house. She is completely alone. She has spent the past 4 hours processing the absolute reality of her situation. The credit cards are dead. The bank accounts are completely empty. Her husband is a catastrophic failure who owes a massive sum of cash to violent men. A parasite does not stay with a dying host. A parasite simply detaches and searches desperately for a new source of nourishment. Vanessa has made the cold and calculated decision to abandon her marriage. She needs liquid cash to fund her immediate escape, and she has found a way to get it. I watch through the interior cameras as she systematically raids my living room. She is not packing her own designer clothes or her expensive shoes. She is looting my late wife's most treasured possessions. Barbara loved antiques. She spent decades carefully curating a collection full of valuable, unique pieces. Vanessa is dragging a 19th century cherry wood side table toward the front door. She grabs a pristine sterling silver tea set and aggressively shoves it into a cardboard box. She rolls up a hand-woven Persian rug that Barbara and I purchased on our 20th anniversary. She is dismantling the physical memory of my marriage to build her own personal getaway fund. A small rental truck pulls into my driveway. Vanessa has hired 2 local movers, paying them with whatever small amount of cash she had hidden in her purse. I watch them load the heavy antique furniture into the back of the truck. She directs them with a ruthless, cold efficiency. She is planning to drive to a high-end pawnbroker across the county line to liquidate the assets for pennies on the dollar. She does not care about the true value of the items or the sentimental history they hold. She only cares about securing enough cash to buy a plane ticket and rent a luxury apartment far away from her husband and his highly dangerous creditors. The timing of what happens next is beautifully poetic. Just as the movers finish lifting a mahogany grandfather clock into the rental truck, Blake turns his leased sports car onto the street. He is driving erratically. He is fleeing from the downtown banking district, and the terrifying realization that his home equity loan was a complete failure. He pulls into the driveway and slams his foot on the brakes, stopping mere inches from the bumper of the rental truck. He steps out of the car. His expensive suit jacket is wrinkled, and his tie is hanging loosely around his neck. He looks at the truck. He looks at the movers holding Barbara's antique dining chairs. He looks at his wife standing on the cedar porch. The realization of her ultimate betrayal hits him like a physical blow to the chest. "What are you doing, Vanessa?" Blake screams. His voice echoes through the quiet suburban neighborhood and is perfectly captured by Gideon's microphone. It streams directly into my earpiece in Denver with crystal clear audio. Vanessa does not flinch. She crosses her arms over her chest and stares down at him from the elevated porch. "I am leaving, Blake. I am taking what little value is left in this miserable house, and I am walking away before those people you owe money to come looking for a collection." Blake stumbles forward. "You are stealing my mother's antiques. You are stealing from my family. We need to sell those to pay my investors. You cannot just take them for yourself." The sheer irony of his statement is staggering. He is furiously offended that she is stealing the property he fully intended to steal himself. He is angry because she beat him to the punch. There is absolutely no honor among thieves. Vanessa lets out a sharp, mocking laugh. It is a cruel and completely heartless sound. "Your family. You do not have a family, Blake. You do not have a house. You do not have a single dime to your name. Your father outsmarted you. He left you with absolutely nothing, and you were too arrogant to see it coming. I am not going down with your sinking ship." Blake climbs the steps of the porch. His face is pale and desperate. He reaches out, trying to grab her arm. He begs her to stay. He promises her he can fix this. He tells her they are a team and that they need to stick together to figure out a plan. He pleads with her using the language of a devoted, loving husband. Vanessa pulls her arm away with violent disgust. She looks at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Stop touching me, Blake. We were never a team. Do you honestly think I married you because of your brilliant personality? Do you think I tolerated living in this boring suburban neighborhood because I wanted to be your loyal wife?" Blake freezes. The absolute silence on the audio feed is heavy and suffocating. Vanessa delivers the final fatal strike to their marriage. "I married you because you told me you were the sole heir to a massive fortune. You told me your father was a weak old man who would be out of the picture in a few years. You promised me millions of dollars. You promised me an estate. But you are just a pathetic failure who got played by a retired accountant. You have nothing. Therefore, you are nothing to me." Blake stands completely motionless on the porch. The words penetrate his arrogance and shatter his entire ego. He realizes he has never been loved. He was simply a financial vehicle for a woman who viewed him exactly the way he viewed me. He is completely unloved, unwanted, and utterly worthless to the only person he trusted. The betrayal destroys him from the inside out. He stares at her with empty, hollow eyes. Vanessa turns to the movers and instructs them to finish packing. She walks down the steps, completely ignoring her husband. She climbs into the driver's seat of the rental truck. Blake does not try to stop her. He does not have the physical or emotional strength. He simply stands on the cedar porch, watching his wife drive away with the stolen remnants of his parents' life. He is left alone in the driveway, staring at the empty street as the sound of the truck engine fades into the distance. In Denver, my phone vibrates on the desk. It is a secure message from Gideon. The text is short and highly professional. Audio file secured and uploaded to the encrypted server. The quality is flawless. I open the server and verify the digital file. The recording is absolutely pristine. I have captured the definitive proof of Vanessa admitting she married him solely for the inheritance. I have captured Blake admitting he intended to steal the antiques to pay illegal debts. I have captured the complete destruction of their alliance. When predators realize the prey has escaped, they inevitably turn their fangs on each other. It is the basic law of nature. I did not have to raise my voice or lift a single finger to destroy their marriage. I simply removed the money that was holding their toxic relationship together. Without my wealth to sustain them, their bond dissolved into pure hatred in less than 48 hours. They are doing my work for me. They are tearing each other apart exactly as I calculated. And every single vicious word is safely stored on my hard drive, waiting to be unleashed in a court of law. The quiet of my Denver apartment is a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unfolding on my surveillance monitor. I am watching my son sitting on the bare hardwood floor of the empty living room in Seattle. The antique furniture is gone. His wife is gone. The safety nets are gone. His phone vibrates relentlessly on the floorboards next to him. It is the private investors. They are losing patience. The margin call deadline is approaching with terrifying speed. They want their $200,000, and they do not care about his excuses. Desperation is a fascinating mechanism to observe. When a deeply arrogant person is backed into a corner, they do not learn humility. They simply double down on their own destructive instincts. Blake is completely out of the options. He cannot secure a loan. He cannot access my trusts. The only legal way to access a highly secured locked estate is if the primary owner is deceased. I watch through the hidden camera as a dark realization washes over his face. He decides that if he cannot find me, he will simply declare me dead. I observe him pacing the empty room. He brings his laptop to the floor and begins navigating the darkest corners of the internet. Through my network surveillance, I track his keystrokes in real time. He is formulating a narrative. He plans to claim that I went on a solitary hiking trip in the remote Cascade Mountains to clear my head after his wife left him, and that I suffered a fatal, tragic fall into a gorge. Usually declaring a missing person legally dead without a body takes years of legal proceedings. But Blake is impatient, arrogant, and completely out of time. He believes he can simply forge a death certificate from a rural county and draft a revised last will and testament to bypass the waiting period. He is crossing the absolute line from unethical entitlement into strict, severe criminality. Through his compromised email outbox, I watch him contact a disgraced former paralegal he met during his failed cryptocurrency ventures. This man operates out of a rundown office park and specializes in fraudulent documentation for desperate clients. Blake gathers the last of his personal belongings, including a few expensive watches he has not yet pawned, and uses them to bribe this corrupt notary. Together, they spend the night drafting a crude but highly official-looking death certificate. They also fabricate a fake will. The forged document explicitly states that my previous blind trusts are completely dissolved and that Blake is the sole unconditional beneficiary of my entire estate. It is a masterpiece of criminal stupidity. Thursday morning arrives. The margin call deadline is only 24 hours away. Blake drives to the county probate court in his wrinkled suit. He walks up to the clerk's window with his forged documents clutched in his sweaty hands. I can perfectly picture him putting on his absolute best performance of a grieving, devastated son. He slides the fake death certificate and the fraudulent will across the counter. He expects the clerk to process the paperwork, unlock the estate, and hand him the keys to his financial salvation. He actually believes he has outsmarted a senior forensic auditor. He genuinely thinks a piece of fake paper will magically bypass the impenetrable legal fortresses my attorney and I constructed. He is entirely oblivious to the digital tripwires waiting for him in the dark. When Wallace and I locked down the deed and the trusts, we did not just freeze the assets. We placed a highly sensitive legal monitor on the county probate registry. Any filing containing my name or my social security number automatically triggers an immediate high-priority alert directly to Wallace's secure server. I am sitting in my living room in Denver sipping black coffee when the notification flashes across my screen. Wallace calls me less than 10 seconds later. His voice is perfectly calm, completely devoid of any surprise. He tells me that Blake has just officially submitted the forged death certificate to the state government. The jaws of the trap have snapped shut. Wallace does not intervene at the courthouse. He does not call the clerk to stop them from accepting the documents. In the world of high-stakes financial crime, you never ever interrupt an enemy when they are actively handing you the exact evidence you need to destroy them. The moment the clerk stamps those forged documents and enters them into the state judicial system, Blake crosses the point of no return. Submitting fraudulent legal documents to a government entity in an attempt to steal millions of dollars is not a simple misdemeanor. It is a massive, undeniable federal crime. Wallace immediately contacts his trusted liaisons at the state and federal level. He presents the authorities with the undeniable proof that I am currently sitting perfectly alive in Colorado, while my son is legally declaring me dead in Washington state. The local police are fully prepared to arrest Blake the moment he steps out of the courthouse doors. But the federal prosecutor intervenes. They instruct the local authorities to stand down temporarily. The feds realize this is no longer just a simple domestic case of a greedy son trying to steal from his father. By utilizing a known corrupt notary and a fraudulent death certificate to bypass interstate financial trusts, Blake has elevated his crime to federal wire fraud and conspiracy. The authorities want to build an airtight, inescapable federal case. They want to completely dismantle the corrupt notary's entire criminal network, along with my son. They decide to let Blake believe his plan is working just long enough to gather every single piece of incriminating evidence required for a maximum sentence. I watched the live feed from my Seattle home later that afternoon. Blake returns to the completely empty house. He walks into the kitchen and lets out a massive echoing sigh of relief. He actually smiles. He opens a bottle of cheap liquor he found in the back of the pantry and takes a long, victorious drink. He thinks he has won. He thinks the probate court will unlock the accounts by Friday morning, allowing him to pay off his dangerous investors and reclaim his luxurious, arrogant lifestyle. He is celebrating alone in a silent, vacated house. He does not realize that every single step he took today was tracked, recorded, and seamlessly added to a massive federal indictment. He thinks he ingeniously bypassed the trust locks. In reality, he just locked the heavy steel door to his own prison cell. He handed me the ultimate weapon to completely obliterate his future, and he wrapped it perfectly in a forged legal document. He is completely isolated, drinking in the dark, happily waiting for a massive financial rescue that will never, ever arrive. His safety net has been entirely vaporized, and he is blindly cheering for his own total destruction. I am sitting in the quiet darkness of my Denver apartment. My encrypted laptop is open, but I am not looking at banking portals or legal documents. I am looking at two separate live tracking maps. When Blake and Vanessa leased their luxury vehicles, I originally co-signed the agreements because their credit was too terrible to secure the loans on their own. As the primary guarantor, I insisted that GPS tracking modules be installed in both cars for insurance purposes. They thought it was an old man being overly cautious. In reality, it was a forensic auditor establishing a permanent digital leash. They had completely forgotten the trackers existed. I have not. It is Friday evening. The margin call from Blake's aggressive investors is officially past due. He owes them $200,000, and he is entirely out of options. His forged probate documents are currently locked in a federal evidence vault. But Blake is an arrogant man, and arrogant men always believe they can talk their way out of a crisis. He has arranged a desperate high-stakes meeting with his creditors at an upscale cigar lounge downtown. He is driving his leased Porsche 911. He plans to walk into that lounge, slide a copy of the fake death certificate across the table, and beg for a 30-day extension. He thinks he can project an image of a wealthy heir who just needs a little more time to liquidate his massive estate. Vanessa is executing her own desperate strategy. She knows her marriage is over. She knows the money is gone. But she refuses to surrender her manufactured social status. She has decided to attend a highly publicized charity gala at the city's modern art museum. She is wearing a designer gown she bought last month using my stolen money. She drove her leased Range Rover to the event, pulling into the VIP valet circle so everyone could see her arrive. She plans to spend the evening drinking champagne, networking with wealthy single men, and securing a new profitable relationship before her current life completely collapses. They are both using my vehicles to project a facade of wealth and stability. They are using my credit to shield themselves from their own ruin. It is time to strip that armor away. I pick up my phone and make a call to the National Repossession Agency I contracted yesterday. I do not ask for a standard collection. I authorize an immediate aggressive dual asset recovery. The agency dispatches 2 separate teams of specialized repo men. These are not polite bankers. These are hardened professionals who move quickly and do not take excuses. I provide them with the live GPS coordinates of both vehicles. I instruct them to execute the repossessions simultaneously, regardless of the location. I watch the tracking map as the first repo truck approaches the Modern Art Museum. Vanessa is inside the gala. She is likely standing near the ice sculpture, laughing at a joke made by a wealthy CEO, pretending her life is absolutely perfect. The repo truck pulls directly into the VIP valet circle. It is a massive, loud industrial vehicle. It stops right next to her gleaming white Range Rover. The valet attendants try to intervene. They tell the repo men they cannot tow a vehicle from the VIP line. The lead repo man simply hands the head valet the legal authorization documents bearing my signature as the primary guarantor. The valet steps back immediately. The repo crew works with terrifying efficiency. They slide the heavy steel forks under the front tires of the Range Rover. The hydraulic winch whines loudly, echoing off the glass walls of the museum. The commotion draws a crowd. Wealthy socialites, charity board members, and local politicians step out of the gala to see what is happening. Vanessa hears the noise and walks out onto the museum steps. Her perfectly curated smile vanishes instantly. She sees her luxury SUV suspended in the air, chained to the back of a dirty tow truck. She drops her champagne flute. It shatters on the concrete. She runs down the steps, her designer gown dragging on the pavement. She screams at the repo men, demanding they drop her car. She claims it is a massive mistake, a banking glitch. She orders the valets to stop them. But no one moves. The wealthy men she was just trying to impress are standing on the steps, watching her throw a desperate, humiliating tantrum over a repossessed car. The facade of the wealthy socialite is completely destroyed. She is exposed as a fraud, screaming in the street, wearing clothes she cannot afford, watching her only mode of transportation being hauled away like garbage. The repo truck pulls out of the circle, leaving her stranded on the pavement in front of the exact people she was trying to manipulate. Simultaneously, the second repo team is tracking Blake's Porsche. Blake has just parked on a busy downtown avenue right in front of the upscale cigar lounge. He steps out of the car, adjusting his tie, holding his briefcase tightly. He walks toward the heavy wooden doors of the lounge, where his dangerous creditors are waiting for him. He is halfway across the sidewalk when the repo truck swerves into the lane. It does not park neatly. It blocks the flow of evening traffic horns blaring from the cars behind it. The repo men jump out. They do not care that Blake is standing right there. They do not care that he is wearing a tailored suit. They execute the hookup in a matter of seconds. Blake turns around, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He runs back to the car, shouting at the men. He reaches for his wallet, offering them cash to stop, but he realizes he has no cash. His bank accounts are frozen. His credit cards are dead. He tries to physically stand between the truck and the Porsche, but the lead repo man shoves him aside with brutal force. The man informs Blake that the lease has been permanently revoked by the primary guarantor due to default and massive financial fraud. The word fraud cuts through the air. The heavy wooden doors of the cigar lounge open. 3 large men in dark suits step out onto the sidewalk. They are the private investors. They have come outside to see why their debtor is causing a scene in the street. They stand on the pavement, watching Blake beg a repo man not to tow his leased car. They watch the successful entrepreneur humiliate himself in the middle of a busy intersection. They realize instantly that Blake is completely broke. They realize he does not have their $200,000. They realize his entire persona is a fabricated lie. Blake watches his Porsche being dragged down the avenue. He turns slowly, knowing he is trapped. He looks at the three investors standing in front of the lounge. There is no charm left. There is no confident smile. He is standing on the street corner, stripped of his vehicle, stripped of his status, facing men who are going to demand their money with extreme violence. He is completely stranded. He has no car. He has no money to call a cab. He cannot run, and he cannot hide. I watch the GPS trackers on my monitor as both vehicles are successfully transported to the secure impound lot. The financial decapitation is complete. They tried to use my resources to project power, and I simply turned those resources into weapons of mass humiliation. They are both standing on the pavement entirely alone, completely exposed to the absolute devastation of their own greed. I'm sitting in the quiet morning light of my Denver apartment. My coffee is cold, but my focus is razor sharp. I am looking at the security feed from my Seattle home. The house that I built with my late wife, the house that Blake and Vanessa tried to steal, is now the only shelter they have left. Last night, their luxury vehicles were repossessed in public. Their credit cards are dead. Their bank accounts are frozen. The illusion of their wealthy, successful lives has been completely and utterly dismantled. They retreated to my house like wounded animals, locking the doors and drawing the blinds, desperately trying to hide from the reality that they have absolutely nothing left. It is 8 a.m. on a crisp Saturday morning. Blake is sleeping on the sofa in the living room, still wearing the wrinkled suit he had on when his Porsche was towed. Vanessa is upstairs in the master bedroom, wrapped in her silk robe, likely staring at the ceiling, wondering how she ended up trapped with a man she despises. The silence in the house is heavy, suffocating. It is the silence of two people who realize that the walls are closing in on them. Suddenly, a loud, authoritative knock echoes through the house. It is not the polite, tentative knock of a neighbor. It is the heavy, demanding knock of law enforcement. Blake startles awake, his eyes wide with panic. He jumps off the sofa, stumbling slightly, and looks toward the front door. He hesitates, terrified that it might be his aggressive investors coming to collect their $200,000. Vanessa appears at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The knock sounds again, louder this time. "Police department, open the door!" A deep voice shouts from outside. Blake swallows hard, his hands trembling as he unlocks the deadbolt and slowly pulls the heavy oak door open. Standing on the cedar porch are two uniformed county sheriff deputies. Their expressions are stern, professional, and completely devoid of sympathy. Standing directly behind them, holding a thick manila folder, is my attorney, Wallace. "Blake Hughes?" the lead deputy asks, though it is not really a question. "Yes, that's me." Blake stammers, his voice barely a whisper. "What's going on? Is there a problem?" Wallace steps forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "The problem, Blake, is that you are currently trespassing on a property that is legally held in a blind trust. You are residing in a house that you do not own, and you have committed massive financial fraud to maintain your residency." Blake's face drains of all color. He looks from Wallace to the deputies, panic rising in his chest. "Fraud? What are you talking about? My father let us move in. We're family. You can't just throw us out." Wallace does not argue. He simply opens the manila folder and pulls out a stack of legal documents. "I am serving you with a 24-hour emergency eviction notice authorized by a federal judge," Wallace says, handing the paperwork to Blake. "This eviction is based on compelling evidence of extreme financial exploitation, property damage, and forgery." Vanessa slowly descends the stairs, her eyes wide with shock. "Eviction? You can't evict us. We don't have anywhere else to go." "That is no longer my client's concern," Wallace replies smoothly. "You forfeited your right to residency the moment you began systematically looting this estate. We have documented evidence of the unauthorized sale of valuable antiques, which constitutes grand larceny. We have proof of forged signatures on banking documents. And most importantly, we have the fraudulent death certificate that Blake submitted to the probate court. The mention of the death certificate hits Blake like a physical blow. He staggers back, clutching the eviction notice. He knows, he whispers, his voice trembling. My father knows about the death certificate. Your father knows everything, Blake, Wallace says, his voice laced with disgust. He knows about the cryptocurrency scam. He knows about the forged home equity loan. He knows about your desperate plan to have him committed. And he knows that you tried to legally declare him dead while he is very much alive. The realization that his entire scheme has been completely exposed paralyzes Blake. He realizes that I have been observing his every move, anticipating his every desperate action. The frail, senile old man he thought he could easily manipulate has systematically dismantled his entire life with ruthless precision. Because you submitted a fraudulent death certificate to a government entity, Wallace continues, your legal status as a resident of this property is officially voided. You cannot claim residency in a house owned by a man you legally declared deceased. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate these premises. If you are still here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., the sheriff deputies will return to physically remove you and arrest you for trespassing. Vanessa begins to hyperventilate. 24 hours? We can't pack an entire house in 24 hours. Where are we supposed to go? You are not packing an entire house, Vanessa, Wallace corrects her sharply. You are only permitted to take your personal clothing and basic toiletries. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every item of value in this house belongs to the trust. If you attempt to remove anything that does not explicitly belong to you, you will be charged with theft. To emphasize his point, a large black security van pulls into the driveway, parking directly behind the sheriff's cruisers. 4 private security guards dressed in tactical uniforms step out of the van and take positions around the perimeter of the property. These security professionals will be stationed outside the house until tomorrow morning, Wallace informs them. They will monitor your packing. They will inspect your bags when you leave. You will not take anything that does not belong to you. Blake looks at the security guards, then at the sheriff deputies, and finally at Wallace. His arrogance is completely gone, replaced by a profound, suffocating despair. Please, he begs, tears welling in his eyes. Please, just let me talk to him. Let me talk to my father. I can explain. I can make this right. Your father has no desire to speak with you, Blake, Wallace says coldly. He has already spoken through these legal actions. You have 24 hours. Wallace turns and walks back to his car, followed by the sheriff deputies. Blake stands in the open doorway, clutching the eviction notice, watching his last remaining connection to wealth and stability drive away. He is left standing in the house he tried to steal, surrounded by private security guards, with exactly 1 day to gather his clothes and walk out into the street. The next morning, the sun rises over the Seattle suburbs, illuminating the absolute ruin of my son's life. I am watching the live feed from the security cameras as Blake and Vanessa prepare to leave. They are not packing in expensive leather suitcases. They are shoving their designer clothes into black plastic trash bags. The reality of their situation has stripped away any pretense of dignity or status. They move through the house in silence, avoiding eye contact. The tension between them is palpable, thick with resentment and mutual blame. They are 2 parasites who have destroyed their host and are now realizing they have no idea how to survive on their own. At 7:55 a.m., they carry their trash bags out to the front porch. The private security guards stand silently by watching them leave. Blake looks back at the house one last time. He looks at the cedar wraparound porch, the bay windows, the pristine lawn. He looks at the life he could have had, the family he could have cherished, the future he completely destroyed with his own greed. He turns and walks down the driveway, carrying a trash bag over his shoulder. Vanessa follows him, her head bowed, her designer sunglasses hiding her tears. They do not have a car. They do not have money for a cab. They walk down the suburban street, dragging their belongings behind them, heading toward the nearest bus stop. I watch them disappear from the camera's view. I do not feel any guilt. I do not feel any regret. I feel only a cold, profound satisfaction. The house that I built, the house that holds the memory of my late wife, is finally clean. The toxic infection has been completely removed. They thought they could throw me out of my own home, and now they are walking the streets with their lives stuffed into garbage bags. The eviction is complete. The fortress is secure. The rain falls heavily on the cracked pavement of a cheap motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. I am watching the exterior through a temporary surveillance feed Gideon managed to tap into. Blake has fallen from a sprawling 4-bedroom estate to a damp $20 a night room that smells of stale smoke and bleach. His wife Vanessa is gone, having vanished into the city to save herself. He is completely alone. But the most dangerous thing about a narcissist is their inability to accept defeat. Even as he sits on a stained mattress with his life in ruins, Blake still believes he can win. He still believes he is the smartest man in the room. He genuinely thinks I am just a frightened, lucky old man hiding in a nearby Seattle suburb, and that if he can just find me, he can force me to undo the financial locks. Blake is a hunted man. The aggressive private investors he owes $200,000 are tracking him. He cannot go to his former friends. He cannot go to his former colleagues. He is a pariah. But instead of running, instead of focusing on his own physical survival, he obsesses over finding me. He takes the very last items of value he possesses. He takes his gold wedding band and a designer watch he managed to slip into his pocket before the eviction. He walks 3 miles in the rain to a local pawn shop. He trades the last remnants of his manufactured wealthy lifestyle for a thin stack of crumpled cash. He does not use this money to buy food or secure better shelter. He uses it to hire a cheap, unlicensed private investigator operating out of a dying strip mall. Blake pays this amateur to track me down. He gives the man my old phone number, my name, and my previous banking details. He wants to know where I am sleeping so he can show up at my door and intimidate me into surrendering my wealth. He assumes this low-level tracker will simply ping my cell phone or find a recent credit card charge at a local grocery store. He completely underestimates the digital fortress I have built. My investigator Gideon is a phantom who spent decades in corporate espionage. Gideon detects the amateur private investigator the absolute moment the man begins running inquiries on my name. Gideon calls me on my secure line in Denver and asks if I want the amateur shut down. I tell Gideon no, I do not want him shut down. I want him fed. I want to build a maze for my son, and I want to put a piece of poisoned cheese right at the center of it. I instruct Gideon to create a ghost protocol. We fabricate a highly specific, entirely fake digital paper trail. Gideon generates a ping on a burner credit card registered in my name showing a purchase at a gas station in rural Idaho. 12 hours later, Gideon plants another digital breadcrumb. He creates a fraudulent hotel reservation under my identity at a sprawling luxury casino resort in the middle of Nevada. It is the perfect bait. It paints a picture of a retired old man fleeing south and carelessly spending money at a casino. The amateur investigator finds the Nevada reservation and immediately reports it back to Blake. I can perfectly imagine the look of triumphant arrogance returning to my son's face. He actually believes he has caught me. He thinks I made a sloppy mistake. The amateur investigator tells Blake that for the rest of the pawned cash, he will personally drive down to the Nevada resort, secure photographic evidence of my presence, and confront me. Blake does not hesitate. He hands over the absolute last dollar to his name. He funds this wild goose chase with the very bottom of his empty pockets. The false hope acts like a powerful drug. For the next 2 days, Blake sits in his damp motel room running on the adrenaline of a fabricated victory. He barely sleeps. He paces the floor, waiting for the phone call from Nevada that will confirm he has finally outsmarted his father. He exhausts his remaining energy and resources, waiting for a triumph that does not exist. He has willingly locked himself inside a mental prison, obsessed with a phantom target, completely ignoring the very real, very physical danger closing in around him. He is so distracted by his hatred for me that he forgets he is being hunted. The aggressive investors have not been looking for me. They have been looking for him. And unlike Blake's cheap investigator, the men looking for my son are highly effective professionals. It is late Thursday evening. Blake is sitting on the edge of the motel bed, staring at his phone, waiting for the Nevada update. A heavy knock rattles the cheap wooden door of his room. Blake freezes. He assumes it might be the motel manager asking for the next night of rent. He walks to the door and pulls it open. It is not the motel manager. It is the men he owes $250,000. They push the door open and step inside. They do not yell. They do not carry weapons that would draw attention. They close the door quietly behind them. Modern debt collection at this level is not about breaking bones or leaving physical bruises that the police can photograph. It is about terrifying surgical extraction. The late investor looks around the miserable room, taking in the absolute ruin of the arrogant young man who promised them massive returns. They know Blake has no cash. They know his bank accounts are frozen by fraud alerts. But they also know he still has a laptop. They know he was dabbling in unregulated cryptocurrency markets. They corner him against the stained wallpaper. The lead investor speaks in a low, calm voice that is infinitely more terrifying than a scream. He demands the laptop. He demands the physical hardware keys that hold the remaining fragments of Blake's digital currency. Blake tries to argue. He tries to tell them about his father in Nevada. He promises that he is just days away from reclaiming his massive family estate. The investors do not care about his desperate stories. They grab him by the collar of his wrinkled shirt and force him to sit at the small desk. They open his laptop. They stand over him, watching his every keystroke. They force him to log into his digital wallets. They force him to unlock the encrypted hardware keys he had hidden in his jacket pocket. They do not leave a single fraction of a cent behind. They systematically transfer every remaining piece of his digital currency into their own untraceable servers. They wipe out the tiny, pathetic fraction of value he had left in the world. When the wallets are completely drained, they do not simply say goodbye. They pick up the laptop, fold it under their arms, and take it with them. They take the hardware keys. They take his charger. They confiscate the very tools he needs to connect to the outside world. They walk out of the motel room, leaving the door wide open to the cold night air. Blake is left sitting on the edge of the mattress. He is perfectly unharmed physically. There is not a single scratch on his body. But he has been completely eviscerated. He has no car to drive. He has no house to sleep in. His wife has abandoned him. He has no cash to buy food. He has no digital currency to trade. He has no laptop to search for help. His phone sits on the nightstand, utterly silent, because the cheap investigator he hired in Nevada has realized the trail is entirely fake and has stopped returning his calls. He is entirely isolated. The false hope has fully drained from his body, leaving a hollow, echoing shell. He thought he was the hunter tracking a helpless old man across the country. He finally realizes he was just a rat running endlessly through a maze designed by a master architect. And he has just hit the final, inescapable dead end. The time for operating exclusively in the shadows has officially come to an end. It is time for me to surface, but strictly on paper. I sit at my desk in my secure Denver apartment, looking at the digital confirmation screen on my monitor. My attorney Wallace and I have just initiated the most devastating legal strike of my entire career. We have officially filed a massive federal civil lawsuit against my son and his wife. The charges include wire fraud, severe elder financial exploitation, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit forgery. We did not just file a standard complaint. We filed a weaponized, inescapable legal trap accompanied by a direct criminal referral to the federal prosecutor's office. My private investigator, Gideon, has spent the last 48 hours confirming their exact physical locations. Vanessa did not get very far after her luxury vehicle was publicly repossessed. Her credit cards are completely dead, and her socialite friends instantly abandoned her when they realized she was financially radioactive. She is currently hiding in a budget motel on the far east side of the city, trying to sell her designer shoes to online buyers using her cracked smartphone. Blake is still trapped in the same miserable room where his dangerous investors confiscated his laptop and his remaining digital currency. They are both entirely isolated, completely broke, and entirely unprepared for the legal avalanche that is about to crush them. I authorize Wallace to dispatch 2 professional process servers. I instruct them to deliver the documents simultaneously so neither Blake nor Vanessa has the opportunity to warn the other. At exactly 10 in the morning, a sharp knock echoes through Vanessa's cheap motel room. She opens the door, likely expecting a local buyer for her used clothing. Instead, she finds a man in a plain suit who hands her a massive, heavy manila envelope. He states her name, confirms her identity, and walks away. Vanessa drops the envelope onto the small circular table near the window. Her hands shake as she tears open the heavy paper. The first page she sees is the official federal court summons. Her name is printed in bold black ink as a primary co-conspirator in a massive financial crime. She flips the page and her breathing stops completely. I did not just sue her. I provided the court with a flawless, itemized forensic audit of every single dollar she stole. She looks at pages of banking spreadsheets mapped out with terrifying precision. Every luxury handbag she purchased, every spa retreat she booked, and every expensive dinner she ordered using my money is listed chronologically. Next to every fraudulent purchase is the exact IP address of her phone, the timestamp, and the undeniable mathematical proof that the funds were illegally siphoned from my compromised accounts. But the financial trace is not the mechanism that breaks her. She flips to the middle of the dossier and finds a printed document labeled Exhibit D. It is a certified, legally transcribed copy of the audio recording Gideon captured perfectly from the street outside my house. She reads her own words printed on the stark white paper. She reads the exact moment she screamed at Blake, admitting that she only married him for his anticipated inheritance. She reads her own admission that she views my estate as a target. She realizes instantly that her divorce strategy is completely annihilated. She cannot play the victim of a manipulative husband. The federal judge will read this transcript and see her exactly for what she is. She is a calculated, opportunistic parasite who willingly participated in the financial assassination of an elderly man. She drops the papers on the floor, sliding down the wall, until she hits the carpet, sobbing in absolute suffocating terror. Across town, a similar knock rattles the door of Blake's motel room. He is sitting in the dark, entirely paranoid, jumping at every sound, because he thinks his violent investors have returned. He creeps to the door and peers through the peephole. Seeing a man in a suit, he slowly opens the door just a crack. The process server shoves the thick envelope through the gap and announces that Blake has been officially served by the federal court. Blake locks the door and carries the heavy package to the stained mattress. He rips it open. He pulls out a stack of documents nearly 2 inches thick. He bypasses the initial civil complaint and flips frantically through the evidence exhibits. He stops cold. Staring back at him is a high-resolution copy of the fake death certificate he paid $50,000 stolen dollars to procure. Across the center of the certificate is a massive red digital watermark from the county probate court, stamped and rejected for criminal forgery. Pinned behind it is the sworn statement of the corrupt notary who instantly turned state's witness for the FBI the moment he was arrested. Blake's hands begin to sweat. He flips to the next section. It is a complete unredacted map of his cryptocurrency transactions. He actually believed his digital wallets were anonymous. He thought his margin trading was untraceable. He looks at a complex flowchart that visually dismantles his entire digital pyramid scheme. The chart exposes the exact blockchain architecture he utilized, tracing the stolen $140,000 through every dummy account right down to the specific minute he executed the transfers. It is an impossible level of financial surveillance. He realizes the person who compiled this audit did not just look at bank statements. They broke his entire digital existence down to its absolute microscopic code. His eyes dart to the bottom of the financial summary. He is looking for the name of the massive corporate law firm that must have generated this report. He finds the sworn affidavit of the primary financial investigator. He reads the signature line. He reads my name. Directly below my signature, printed in clean, undeniably official text, is my professional history. Calvin Certified Fraud Examiner. Former Senior Forensic Auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. Founder and Chief Executive of a leading international financial intelligence firm. Blake stares at the paper until his vision blurs. The psychological break is immediate and devastating. The walls of the cheap motel room seem to shrink around him. The horrifying realization hits him with the force of a freight train. He remembers standing in my kitchen under the bright recessed lights. He remembers slamming the receipt for the antique watch on the granite counter and screaming at me to stop wasting his money. He remembers thinking I was just a fragile, senile old man who was slowly losing his grip on reality. He realizes he walked into a high-stakes game of chess against a ruthless grandmaster, completely unaware that the board was already rigged. He realizes that every single move he made over the past month was anticipated, monitored, and weaponized against him. The man he plotted to lock away in a medical facility is a master forensic accountant who spent 40 years hunting down international cartels and corporate embezzlers. Blake grabs his phone. It is the only electronic device he has left. He frantically dials the number of a high-profile defense attorney he used to golf with during his brief period of corporate success. The lawyer answers the phone politely. Blake begins rambling, telling the man he needs emergency legal representation for a federal civil suit. The lawyer asks for the opposing counsel's name and the docket number. Blake reads the information off the front page of the subpoena. The line goes completely silent for 10 seconds. The lawyer clears his throat and states that his firm does not possess the resources to fight Wallace's legal team, especially when a federal criminal referral is attached to the civil complaint. The lawyer advises Blake to find a cheap public defender and immediately hangs up the phone. Blake tries another number. The result is identical. Nobody wants to touch his case. He is financially radioactive and legally doomed. The sheer volume of evidence provided in the envelope crushes any conceivable hope of a defense. He cannot claim ignorance because the financial trace proves his intent. He cannot claim coercion because the forged death certificate proves his malice. He cannot blame his wife because her audio transcript proves they were co-conspirators. He is completely pinned in place. He has no money to run. He has no passport to flee the country. He has no vehicle to leave the city. He is legally mandated to appear for a formal deposition in exactly 1 week. He throws the documents across the room, burying his face in his hands, screaming into the empty silence of the motel. The legal strike has landed perfectly. They have finally realized exactly who they are dealing with, and they know with absolute certainty that they are not going to survive the fallout. The red light on my monitor blinks on, indicating the secure video feed is completely active. I am sitting in my Denver apartment with a fresh cup of coffee, looking at a high-definition live stream of a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Seattle. Wallace, my attorney, is seated at the head of the long mahogany table. On the opposite side of the table sit the 3 people who are about to experience the absolute destruction of their legal defense. I look closely at my son on the screen. Blake has aged 10 years in the span of exactly 1 week. He is wearing a suit that looks entirely too big for him, now his shoulders slumped in total defeat. The arrogant, confident man who yelled at me in my kitchen is completely gone. His face is pale and covered in a patchy, unkempt beard. He is sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room. He looks exactly like a cornered animal waiting for the final blow. Vanessa sits at the very edge of the table, putting as much physical distance between herself and Blake as the room allows. She refuses to look at him. She stares blankly at the wall, her designer clothes replaced by a cheap, wrinkled blouse. She knows she is trapped. She knows her escape plan failed entirely, and she is desperately trying to distance herself from the sinking ship that is her husband. Sitting between them is their newly acquired defense attorney. I can tell immediately that he is a low-tier lawyer, probably a public defender, or the only man desperate enough to take their case on the promise of a future payment. He wears a cheap suit and a highly nervous expression. He arranges a few sparse papers on the table, trying to project a confidence he clearly does not possess. He looks into the camera lens, attempting to establish dominance over a digital connection. He has absolutely no idea what is about to happen to his career. The deposition begins officially. The court reporter swears everyone in for the record. The defense attorney leans forward and begins his opening statement. He tries to paint a picture of a tragic family misunderstanding. He uses a soft, patronizing tone. He claims that I am simply a confused, grieving widower who has severely misinterpreted his loving son's attempts to manage the family estate. He suggests that my sudden departure and subsequent legal actions are the result of vindictive paranoia brought on by my advancing age and the lingering trauma of losing my wife. He actually dares to suggest that Blake was only trying to protect my assets from my own declining mental faculties. I do not interrupt him. I let him speak for 10 uninterrupted minutes. I let him build his entire defense on the premise of my supposed incompetence. I let him dig a massive hole for his clients. When he finally finishes his monologue, he sits back with a smug look, assuming he has perfectly framed the narrative for the official record. Wallace looks at the camera and asks if I have a response. I lean into the microphone. My voice is calm, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. I do not defend my mental state. I do not express anger over his insulting theories. I simply begin reciting raw financial data. I tell the attorney that on October 14th at 2:15 in the afternoon, his client transferred $8,400 from a specific checking account ending in 4721. I state the exact internet protocol address of the laptop used for the unauthorized transfer. I state the exact routing number of the destination account, which belongs to a failed offshore cryptocurrency exchange. The defense attorney loses his smug smile immediately. I do not stop. I detail the exact timestamps of Vanessa's luxury purchases, matching them perfectly with the unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts. I recite the exact serial number of the forged home equity loan application, along with the precise geolocation data of Blake's cell phone at the exact moment the forged signature was submitted to the bank. I watch the defense attorney turn pale on the monitor. He looks at his clients in absolute shock. He realizes instantly that Blake and Vanessa never told him about the digital audit. They lied to their own lawyer. They told him I was just a senile old man making wild, baseless accusations. I am methodically burying his entire legal strategy under a mountain of undeniable hard forensic evidence. Blake cannot handle the exposure. The sheer volume of precise data shatters his remaining sanity. He realizes he looks like an absolute fool in front of the legal professionals. He suddenly stands up from his chair, slamming his hands violently on the mahogany table. He leans toward the camera, his face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. He begins to scream at me. He completely ignores his lawyer's frantic instructions to sit down and be quiet. Blake shouts that I owe him. He screams that he is my only son and that the money was going to be his eventually anyway. He yells that I am a selfish, miserable old man who cares more about spreadsheets than his own family. He claims that I ruined his future out of pure spite and malice. He demands that I drop the lawsuit and give him the money he deserves. His face is bright red. Spittle flies from his mouth as he rages. He is throwing a violent, pathetic tantrum on a legally recorded video feed, further destroying his own credibility. I do not yell back. I do not engage with his hysteria. I simply reach forward and press a single button on my keyboard. I mute his microphone. The effect is incredibly profound. On the screen, Blake is still screaming. His mouth is moving frantically. His arms are flailing wildly in the air. He is exerting all his remaining energy into a vicious tirade, but my apartment remains perfectly silent. He has no voice. He has no power. I have completely silenced him with a single keystroke. I watch him scream in total silence for a full minute, allowing the absolute futility of his existence to wash over the conference room. When he finally stops gasping for breath and sinking back into his chair, I unmute the connection. I tell the defense attorney that I have one final piece of evidence to submit for the official record. I instruct Wallace to hand the lawyer a single printed document from the central evidence folder. Wallace slides a piece of paper across the polished table. It is the printed email draft I intercepted during my midnight audit. The email addressed to the corrupt medical practitioner. The lawyer picks up the paper. His eyes scan the text rapidly. I watch his expression transform from nervous apprehension to absolute professional terror. I speak slowly, ensuring the court reporter captures every single word. I explain that the document is a premeditated plan by his clients to drug me with unauthorized medications. I explain that they intended to induce symptoms of severe cognitive decline in order to purchase a fraudulent medical diagnosis of advanced dementia. I state that this constitutes a conspiracy to commit medical fraud, severe elder abuse, and federal kidnapping. The defense attorney drops the paper onto the table as if it were coated in acid. He looks at Blake and Vanessa with pure disgust. His clients have just exposed him to massive criminal liability. He knows that if he continues to represent them, he could be directly implicated in a conspiracy to cover up multiple federal felonies. The lawyer stands up abruptly. He does not pack his sparse papers. He does not say goodbye to his clients. He looks directly at Wallace and states for the official court record that he was entirely misled regarding the facts of this case. He formally announces his immediate withdrawal as defense counsel, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts and massive client perjury. He turns and walks out of the conference room. The heavy wooden door slams shut behind him. Blake and Vanessa are left sitting completely alone at the large table. They have no money. They have no home. And now they have absolutely no legal representation. They look at the camera, their eyes wide with the horrifying realization that the game is completely over. I do not offer them a closing statement. I do not say a single parting word. I simply reach forward and terminate the video connection, leaving them abandoned to face the full, unmitigated wrath of the federal justice system alone. The civil deposition was merely a mechanism to lock them into sworn perjury. Once their defense attorney walked out of that sterile conference room, the civil phase of my operation officially ended. I did not waste a single minute. My attorney Wallace and I securely transmitted the entire unredacted video recording of the deposition directly to the federal prosecutor's office. We included the sworn transcript, the offshore bank routing numbers, the intercepted email drafts, and the absolute crown jewel of the entire operation, the digitally watermarked forged death certificate. The federal authorities had been waiting patiently in the wings while we built the foundation of the case. Now they had a perfect airtight confession, recorded under penalty of perjury. The federal hammer was finally dropping, and it was going to strike with absolute devastating precision. My private investigator, Gideon, maintained continuous, unbroken surveillance on Vanessa. After the catastrophic failure of the deposition, her instinct for self-preservation completely overrode whatever remaining rational thought she possessed. She knew the federal agents were coming for her. She abandoned her cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, leaving behind the few items of designer clothing she had not yet managed to pawn. She scraped together exactly $140 in cash, which was just enough to purchase a one-way commercial bus ticket across state lines. Gideon tracked her movement to a crowded, dirty bus station in the industrial district. I watched the live geographic coordinates pulse on my secure monitor. She was sitting on a hard plastic bench wearing dark sunglasses inside a dimly lit terminal, clutching a fake leather purse. She actually believed she could simply board a commercial vehicle and disappear into the American Midwest. She drastically underestimated the reach and speed of the federal government. 3 black sports utility vehicles pulled up to the front curb of the bus terminal. 6 federal marshals wearing tactical vests stepped through the sliding automatic doors. They did not shout. They moved with terrifying, quiet efficiency. Gideon's audio feed captured the exact moment they approached her. They addressed her by her full legal name. Vanessa tried to stand up, stammering a pathetic denial, claiming they had the wrong person. The lead marshal simply informed her she was under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and severe elder exploitation. They placed her in heavy steel handcuffs right there in the middle of the crowded waiting room. Dozens of weary travelers stopped to stare as the woman who used to demand priority valet service for her luxury vehicle was marched out of a filthy bus terminal by federal agents. Her manufactured socialite status was permanently and publicly extinguished. Blake did not attempt to flee. The deposition had completely broken his psychological resolve. He was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure. Gideon tracked his phone signal to a decaying, greasy local diner a few miles from his motel room. I accessed the security feed from a business across the street to watch the culmination of his arrogance. Blake was sitting entirely alone in a cracked vinyl booth, staring blankly at a cold cup of black coffee. This was the man who just weeks ago wore tailored suits and yelled at me in my own kitchen for spending my own money. Now he looked like a vagrant. He had not shaved in days. His clothes were heavily wrinkled and stained. He was sitting there waiting for a miracle that was mathematically impossible. The federal agents did not give him the dignity of a private, quiet arrest. 4 plainclothes agents entered the diner. They surrounded his booth, completely blocking any physical route of escape. I watched as the lead agent flashed a gold badge and instructed Blake to stand up and place his hands behind his back. Blake did not argue. He did not yell. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He stood up slowly, submitting to the handcuffs without a single word of protest. The diner patrons, ordinary working-class people eating their lunch, stopped chewing and watched in total silence as my son was led out the front door. He was placed into the back of a federal vehicle, stripped of his freedom, his pride, and his entire future. The audit of his life was physically executing its final penalty phase. 48 hours later, I attended their initial bail hearing via a secure closed-circuit judicial video link from my apartment in Denver. The federal courthouse in Seattle was cold and imposing. Blake and Vanessa were brought into the courtroom wearing standard-issue oversized orange prison jumpsuits. Their wrists and ankles were bound by heavy chains that clinked loudly against the polished wooden floor. They were seated at the defense table, looking absolutely terrified and completely exhausted. They were appointed a severely overworked public defender who had barely had enough time to review the massive mountain of forensic evidence mounted against them. The federal prosecutor stood before the judge and read the extensive list of charges. Multiple counts of federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, interstate transportation of stolen funds, and the most severe charge of all, the creation and submission of fraudulent government documents. The prosecutor formally requested that bail be denied entirely. The public defender weakly argued that his clients were first-time offenders and posed no physical threat to the surrounding community. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar exploitation, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the heavy evidence file. She specifically pulled out the forged death certificate. She stared at the document for a long moment, then looked directly down at Blake. The courtroom audio feed picked up her voice, which was dripping with absolute judicial contempt. She stated for the official record that in her 20 years on the bench, she had rarely seen such a calculated, predatory, and morally bankrupt scheme executed against a vulnerable family member. She noted that Blake had actively tried to declare me legally dead to bypass banking security, while simultaneously planning to illegally commit me to a psychiatric ward to steal my home. She declared that anyone willing to forge a death certificate and bribe a medical professional is fundamentally untrustworthy and poses an extreme flight risk. She slammed her wooden gavel down with a sharp, resounding crack. Bail was categorically denied. The courtroom deputies stepped forward and grabbed Blake and Vanessa by the arms. Vanessa began to sob uncontrollably, her knees giving out as she realized she was not going home. She was going straight to the county lockup to await a lengthy federal trial. Blake looked up at the video monitor, where my face was being broadcast live into the courtroom. His eyes were wide, filled with a desperate, silent plea for mercy. He was waiting for the father he knew, the quiet, patient man who always fixed his mistakes to somehow intervene and save him from the consequences of his own actions. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply sat at my desk and watched the deputies physically drag him out of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, sealing their fate. The arrogant son who stood in my kitchen and commanded me to stop wasting his money was now trading his tailored wardrobe and his luxury vehicles for an orange jumpsuit and a cold concrete cell. He had tried to treat my life like a simple ledger he could easily manipulate and erase. He failed to realize that I was the one who balances the books, and his account was now permanently closed. 9 months have passed since the federal marshals executed their swift and devastating arrests. I am sitting perfectly still in the back row of a massive federal courtroom in downtown Seattle. The wooden benches are hard and cold. The room smells of polished mahogany and stale, conditioned air. The passage of time has operated like a slow, grinding mill for my son and his wife. They spent the last 270 days locked inside a county detention center, awaiting their ultimate fate. They did not have access to artisan coffee or designer clothing. They had 9 months of isolation to deeply consider the exact sequence of their own failures. I chose to sit in this very back row of the gallery today. I did not sit in the front section typically reserved for the grieving victims of financial crimes. I am not a victim. I am the architect of the reality they are currently facing. I watch the heavy wooden doors near the judge's bench swing open. The bailiffs lead Blake and Vanessa into the courtroom. The transformation in their physical appearance is absolutely staggering. They are both wearing standard-issue oversized khaki prison uniforms. The vibrant, arrogant energy they carried in my kitchen has been completely extinguished. Vanessa looks hollow and incredibly fragile. Her posture is curved inward as if she is trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. Her hair is dull and unkempt. She does not dare to look out into the gallery. She keeps her eyes glued firmly to the floor as she shuffles toward the defense table. The federal justice system is not a machine that tolerates arrogance. During the past 9 months, their defense attorneys tried desperately to negotiate a miracle. They attempted to suppress the audio recordings. They filed motions to invalidate the massive digital forensic trace my investigator and I provided. Every single legal motion was brutally and systematically denied by the presiding federal judge. The evidence I delivered was too absolute. It was completely airtight. When faced with the terrifying prospect of a mandatory 20-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary, their fragile resolve shattered entirely. They surrendered. They signed comprehensive plea agreements formally admitting their absolute guilt to multiple felony counts of wire fraud forgery and severe elder financial exploitation. They traded their constitutional right to a trial for a guaranteed, slightly reduced sentence. It was not a moral awakening or a genuine confession. It was an act of pure, cowardly self-preservation. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, calls the court to order. She addresses Vanessa first. The judge reads the charges aloud, outlining the extravagant theft and the malicious intent behind her actions. She details how Vanessa willingly participated in a conspiracy to strip an elderly man of his autonomy simply to fund her luxury lifestyle. The words echo through the silent courtroom, painting a picture of absolute moral bankruptcy. The sentence is handed down with a cold, unyielding judicial finality. Vanessa receives 4 years in a federal correctional institution, followed by strict supervised release. She does not cry. She is completely numb. The wealthy socialite who demanded priority valet service has been permanently reduced to a federal inmate number. The bailiffs instruct her to sit down. The judge then turns her full attention to Blake. My son stands up slowly. His hands are cuffed at his waist. The heavy metal chains around his ankles rattle against the polished floorboards. He looks incredibly frail and terrified. The confident executive who forged my signature and threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward is completely gone. The judge reads his extensive list of charges. She highlights the profound and unique cruelty of his specific actions. She states for the official record that forging a death certificate for a living parent is one of the most predatory acts she has ever witnessed in her courtroom. She emphasizes that these were not impulsive crimes of passion or simple financial mistakes. They were highly calculated predatory acts of financial violence executed with terrifying precision. Before handing down the final mandatory sentence, the judge pauses. She asks Blake if he has any final statement he wishes to make to the court. Blake nods slowly. He shuffles toward the small wooden podium positioned in the center of the room. He does not look at the judge. He turns around, slowly facing the gallery. His eyes scan the rows of wooden benches until they finally find me sitting perfectly still in the shadows of the back row. He looks at me, and his face completely crumbles. His eyes are red and swollen. He grips the edges of the wooden podium with his trembling, handcuffed hands. He clears his throat, and his voice shakes, echoing through the sterile, majestic room. He begins to speak directly to me. He tells the court that he is profoundly sorry for everything he has done. He says that the intense pressure of his massive debts blinded him to his own morality. He claims that the greed completely consumed him and turned him into a person he no longer recognizes. He says he knows he destroyed our family. He says he ruined the memory of his mother and desecrated the home she loved. He cries real heavy tears that fall down his pale face and stain the collar of his prison uniform. He begs me to understand that he was desperate and terrified of losing his status. He begs for my forgiveness. He asks me to look at him as the son I raised the boy who used to ride his bicycle in our driveway. He pleads for a single shred of mercy from the father he actively tried to destroy. I sit perfectly still in the wooden pew. I listen to every single word he says. I hear the desperation in his voice. I hear the genuine sorrow of a man who has lost absolutely everything. But I also hear the fundamental misunderstanding of his own catastrophic actions. He is begging for forgiveness as if he simply made a terrible temporary mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill. A mistake is making a poor investment in the stock market. What Blake and Vanessa executed against me was not a mistake. It was a highly coordinated, premeditated psychological and financial assassination. They spent weeks meticulously plotting my total demise. They hired a known criminal forger. They researched luxury nursing homes to lock me away in while they spent my life savings. They laughed in the dark about my absolute vulnerability. You do not forgive an assassin just because their weapon jammed and exploded in their own hands. I do not frown. I do not show anger. I do not shed a single tear. I look directly into his desperate, pleading eyes across the length of the courtroom. I offer a single slow, deliberate nod of my head. The nod is not a pardon. The nod is a cold, formal acknowledgement. It is a silent confirmation that I have heard his words, that I see his absolute ruin, and that the ledger is finally balanced. The nod tells him that the audit is permanently closed. He realizes in that exact moment, looking at my expressionless face, that there will be no emotional reconciliation. There will be no prison visits. There will be no letters or phone calls. The forgiving, patient father he knew is permanently gone, replaced entirely by the severe consequences of his own boundless greed. Blake's shoulders collapse entirely. The final sliver of false hope drains completely out of his body. He turns back around to face the judge, accepting his absolute defeat. The judge looks down from the elevated bench with total authority. She sentences him to 6 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and mandates complete financial restitution. The words fall heavily into the silent room, locking his fate into place. 6 years. A massive portion of his adult life will be spent inside a concrete and steel box, stripped of all autonomy. The judge raises her hand and strikes her heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. The sharp, heavy crack of the wood echoes through the room like a gunshot. The sound of the gavel is the ultimate conclusion. The bailiffs step forward immediately. They grab Blake by the arms and guide him toward the heavy side door, that leads back to the subterranean holding cells. He does not look back at me again. He shuffles away the chains dragging heavily across the floor. Vanessa is led out through a separate door, disappearing into the penal system. The courtroom slowly begins to empty. The defense lawyers pack their briefcases and walk away. The federal prosecutors shake hands and prepare for their next case. I remain seated in the back row for a few more minutes, enjoying the absolute silence. The heavy, suffocating tension that began a year ago in my kitchen has entirely dissipated. The threat has been totally neutralized. The conflict is permanently terminated. I stand up, smooth the lapels of my dark suit, and walk out of the federal building into the bright, clear afternoon air. I am 65 years old today. I woke up long before the sun breached the horizon, a habit forged by a lifetime of meticulous routine. But the air I breathe this morning is entirely different. It does not carry the heavy, stagnant weight of suburban Seattle. It carries the sharp, bracing chill of the Pacific Northwest coastline. I step out onto the expansive wooden deck of my new home. It is a striking mid-century modern structure, perched high on a rugged cliff overlooking the churning gray waters of the Oregon coast. The architecture is clean, purposeful, and flooded with natural light. There are no dark corners here. There are no shadows for parasites to hide in. I sold the massive 4-bedroom estate in Seattle exactly 3 weeks after the gavel fell in that federal courtroom. Some people asked me how I could so easily let go of the house I built with my late wife. The truth is, the house ceased to be a sanctuary the moment my son and his wife occupied it with their boundless greed. They stripped the soul from those walls when they sat in the kitchen and coldly plotted my demise. Selling the property was not a surrender of my beautiful memories with Barbara. It was a necessary surgical amputation of a diseased asset. I packed away the genuine memories I cherished in my heart, signed the final transfer deeds, and handed the keys to a young, hard-working family who actually deserved to build a life there. I walked away without a single backward glance, leaving the ghosts of betrayal permanently behind me. With the physical ties completely severed, I turned my attention to the substantial wealth I had so fiercely protected. Money, when hoarded without purpose, is simply a stagnant number on a digital ledger. I refused to let my fortune sit idle in an offshore trust waiting for an heir who no longer existed in my heart. Instead, I established a comprehensive, heavily endowed charitable foundation. I partnered with a nationwide network of aggressive federal prosecutors and high-tier civil litigators to provide free, immediate legal representation for elderly victims of family financial exploitation. My funds are now actively deployed across the country, hunting down predatory children and abusive caretakers. I finance the private investigators, cover the exorbitant court fees, and provide emergency housing for vulnerable victims who have been stripped of their assets by the people they trusted most. Every single time a greedy relative tries to force a vulnerable parent into a psychiatric facility or drain their life savings, they risk running directly into a massive legal wall funded entirely by my estate. I am using the wealth my son tried to steal to completely destroy people exactly like him. It is a highly effective, incredibly satisfying reallocation of capital. Blood does not make a family. That is the most profound and painful lesson I have learned in my 65 years on this earth. Blood is merely a biological coincidence. True family is forged in the fires of absolute loyalty and mutual respect. I have meticulously cultivated a new circle of trust. Wallace, the brilliant attorney who stood by my side and locked down my assets, visits me on the coast every few months. We sit on this very deck, drink aged scotch, and review the successful prosecutions funded by my foundation. Gideon, the phantom private investigator who captured the undeniable audio of my son's betrayal, is no longer just a contractor. He is a fiercely trusted ally. We speak weekly, coordinating sophisticated surveillance on new financial predators. They are the men who proved their worth when the stakes were at their absolute highest. They are my chosen family. My new neighbors in this quiet Oregon community know absolutely nothing about the massive offshore trusts or the spectacular federal downfall of my biological son. To the retired couple next door, I am simply Calvin, the quiet widower, who keeps his lawn immaculate and helps them fix the engine on their old fishing boat. To the local barista in town, I am the polite man who always orders his coffee black and tips generously. They do not look at me and see a walking bank account. They do not calculate my expiration date. They judge me entirely by the content of my character, the firmness of my handshake, and the honesty of my daily actions. It is an incredibly liberating existence. I am respected purely for the man. I am not the financial resources I command. I take a slow, deep sip from my ceramic mug. The hot, bitter coffee perfectly contrasts the freezing ocean wind whipping against my face. I look out over the vast, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The water is violent, endless, and entirely indifferent to the petty squabbles of human greed. It is a beautiful, untamable force of nature. Standing here listening to the heavy waves crash against the jagged rocks below, I feel a profound, unshakable peace settling deep into my bones. The anxiety of the past year, the suffocating tension of living with traitors, has been entirely washed away by the salt air. I occasionally think about Blake sitting in his concrete cell, stripped of his tailored suits and his fabricated arrogance. I do not feel anger anymore. I do not feel sorrow. I feel absolute indifference. He made a calculated predatory choice and he received a calculated absolute consequence. He thought he was playing a simple game with a fragile, gullible old man who was slowly losing his mind. He severely underestimated his target. I did not just passively survive the vicious greed of my own flesh and blood. Survival implies merely escaping with your life, running away, and hiding from the damage. What I executed was a complete structural retaliation. I identified a massive moral deficit within my own home. I gathered the undeniable forensic evidence while operating completely undetected. I audited his betrayal with flawless, cold precision. I applied the maximum legal and financial penalties available within the federal justice system, completely stripping him of his freedom and his future. And finally, I reallocated the remaining resources to ensure maximum future stability for others who cannot defend themselves. I lower my coffee mug and rest my hands on the sturdy wooden railing of my deck. The sun finally breaks through the thick coastal clouds, illuminating the ocean horizon in brilliant, blinding gold. The ledger of my life is perfectly balanced. The debts have been mercilessly collected, the liabilities have been permanently removed, and my future is absolutely secure. I close my eyes, breathe in the cold ocean wind, and embrace the beautiful silent victory of a perfectly closed account. The absolute lesson here is that blood does not equate to loyalty, and silence should never be mistaken for weakness. We are often culturally conditioned to tolerate immense abuse from our own relatives under the dangerous illusion of unconditional family love. However, true wealth is not found in sprawling estates or offshore bank accounts. It lies in your self-respect and the courage to establish impenetrable boundaries. When you allow parasites to drain your resources and your dignity, you become an accomplice to your own destruction. Sometimes the most profound act of justice you can offer an arrogant predator is the ruthless, unyielding reality of absolute consequences. If you believe that respect must be earned rather than blindly inherited, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments below how you handled the toxic elements in your own life.